Okay, well, thanks for joining us for today's webinar from the Institute for Research on Poverty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm Dave Chancellor, and I'll be your host today. Our webinar today is on understanding and addressing fathers' mental health, and I'm happy to welcome our four presenters. We'll be hearing from Dr. Tova Walsh of the Sandra Rosenbaum School of Social Work at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Daryl Davidson, who is the director of the Milwaukee Fatherhood Initiative and the Community Engagement Director at the City of Milwaukee, Dr. Sheehan Fisher of the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine, and Daniel Singley of the Center for Men's Excellence. So thanks to all of you for being here. This webinar is part of a series of webinars on fatherhood issues that we here at IRP have co-produced with the Wisconsin Child Abuse and Neglect Prevention Board. And if you're interested in other topics related to fatherhood, programming, and the roles of dads, you can check out the recordings of past webinars on the IRP YouTube channel or through the Prevention Board's resource library. So in addition to recognizing the Prevention Board, I also want to acknowledge the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation at the Department of Health and Human Services for their partial support of this webinar series through their funding of IRP as the National Research Center on Poverty and Economic Mobility. So we have an hour today, and after we hear from each of our presenters, we're going to focus on a discussion of some of the issues that around this topic of fathers' mental health that so many of you submitted through registration. So keep an eye out for those, and then we'll get through as many as we can before we kind of launch into a live Q&A with your questions that you submit there. As a lot of you found, we've got the chat open today, and so you're absolutely welcome to use that, and you can also participate just through Q&A as well. So we do have closed captions on today, and you can toggle those on and off at the bottom of your screen as it's useful to you, and we will be posting a recording of the webinar later on this week. So keep an eye out for that in your email on the Prevention Board's website and on the IRP website and YouTube channel. So with that, Dr. Tova Walsh, let me turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Dave. So I am just totally enjoying watching all the introductions happening in the chat and seeing how many people are joining us from all across the country who share a commitment to working with fathers, working with children, working with families. And we are just delighted to have you with us. I am super excited to be presenting along with Daryl, Sheehan, and Danny today to have three really terrific professionals who both study issues related to fathers' mental health and practice with fathers in a variety of settings. So in clinical settings, providing mental health treatment, as well as working with fatherhood programs that serve fathers more broadly across a range of needs. We are going to run this webinar a little bit differently than previous webinars in this series. So if you are joining us and you've been attending the other sessions, just want to orient you to what's going to be different this time. We are going to have shorter opening comments from each of the panelists, and then we are going to have some guided discussion around questions that you have submitted with your registration. And then after that, we'll move into some Q&A, drawing on questions that we hope you will put into the chat to engage with us. So just by way of kicking off and getting us started, just want to start this conversation by saying that while we continue to learn more about men's mental health as they become fathers, this much is clear. Fathers, like mothers, are vulnerable to depression in the period surrounding the birth of a new baby. And that depression on the part of fathers has implications for families as well as for fathers themselves. And so as we get started, we're going to talk about the experiences, health, and relationships of fathers across the transition to parenthood, talk about ways of engaging fathers in services, and we are excited to have a broad discussion with you. So I'm going to turn it over to Danny, who's going to get us started by talking a little bit about the changing culture of fatherhood and expectations of men.
Thanks, Tova. I'm thrilled to be able to take part in this panel. And like Tova was just saying, it's so cool to see nearly 400 participants and all the activity in the chat, to see so much engagement. So I'm Danny Singley. I'm a psychologist here in San Diego. And my general area of focus is men's issues and the psychology of men and masculinities. Within that, my research is on fathers and the psychosocial transition to fatherhood, fathers' involvement with infants. And so I'm highly involved both at a research, contributing to it, absorbing the research, but then also in a clinical practice role as well. And what I wanted to highlight to sort of set the stage for, I think, some of the questions we'll be getting to is what I see as the ongoing evolution or the changing role of fatherhood in today's society. And part of what goes into that, as I see it, when I talk about sort of the shifting identity, what it means to be a man and maleness these days is shifting, somewhat slowly. I like the phrase that you're starting to see what it means to be a man and masculinity as being under construction. And one of the dimensions of masculinity that I think that's happening the most publicly and the most clearly in is fatherhood. And we could make all kinds of caveats about different groups or different regions or different countries, but generally speaking, certainly in Western countries, fathers these days are expected to be much more involved than ever before. And part of the problem is we're not giving dads, especially new and expectant dads, the models to do so. And as I see these expectations of greater involvement coming through with service providers, with social media, with traditional media, but I also see this sort of evolving version of what it means to be the man, being more emotionally available, more engaged, focusing on authenticity and incorporating that into the fatherhood role, and having fatherhood be much more salient, a more central part of what it is to that dad. I'm seeing how it plays out in terms of mental health difficulties, including anxiety and depression, relationship concerns, and substance use issues, because men will feel sort of caught. I know I'm supposed to be really involved. I'm not exactly sure how, and then that can have ripple effects. So that sort of sets the stage for my frame today.
Thank you so much, Danny. So Daryl, now I want to invite you to speak to us a little bit about fathers' need for support surrounding pregnancy and birth, and talk to us a little bit about the importance of connecting early with fathers.
Thank you, Tova, and welcome everyone to our webinar today. I'm Daryl Davidson. I'm the director of the Milwaukee Fatherhood Initiative, which is a directly supported agency that comes through the city of Milwaukee, supported by our mayor, supported by our common council, and it goes through our offices related to community engagement. It is a collaborative organization that works with a variety of different community activities as well as representatives. And we are focused on partnerships that can enhance the relationship and the involvement of fathers with their children, and to strengthen the bonds within the family so that we can have a healthy community. So we offer classes, we offer gatherings, we also have fairs that last over a 2-day period that engage fathers in finding jobs, in parenting, in learning about child development, in addressing legal issues as well as their health issues. We do that annually in October, and you'll be hearing more about that later on in this presentation. The impact of a father is especially important because we are aware of research that shows that fathers are very essential in the reading development of a child and their readiness for school. But in the same regard, we also know that fathers who are hesitant or who will have anxiety or not relaxed, who do not see a proper role for themselves in their child's life, those children begin to display some of the same types of things that the father is exhibiting. And one of the reasons why we're very aware that fathers are engaged in a lot of activities outside of the relationship with the mother or the relationship with the child that are demonstrating stress is because we're familiar with what happens in the case of men typically. They may not express when they're having difficulty or when they're beginning to experience fear. Often, if they are portrayed as the person who is the last word or the person who answers many questions, and now they're involved in something that they're really not sure about or haven't researched enough, it begins to work on them, and we start seeing more stress, and we start seeing more behaviors that might take them in the opposite direction away from the family. What we want to encourage are opportunities where men can be involved not only with professionals and care providers, but we also want men to engage with other men. And at our Milwaukee's Fatherhood Initiative, we will have men-to-men educational sessions and gatherings and also support sessions where we'll have experienced fathers talk to inexperienced fathers or men who are prepared to become fathers. The mental health of a father can directly affect the relationship with the entire family. We're very aware that a father's role as a man is actually a three-dimensional role. He is someone's son. He also is now someone's father. And of course, there is a relationship, whether it's a full partnership, where it's a living relationship, or it's a co-parenting, or a relationship where they're raising the child together, but not every day with the mom. We still know that every situation requires support, especially with fathers who have acknowledged, in the case of many of our clients, that they did not grow up with a father and they didn't know what a support system would look like. They have no idea what their actual role is. And if they became adolescents and men in environments where it was more appropriate for them to either be stoic, or if there was an emotion to be expressed, it was anger, that's not the appropriate activity that we should have around a child. So we look at those things as being opportunities for us where we can engage with fathers and talk to them about what exactly is a place for them in their family's life and how children will perceive them as being role models, no matter how limited they believe that their influence is. Everything that a father does in the presence of their child is extremely important. So as we go through this session, we'd like to also talk about other things related to child development, not just school readiness, but also how important it is that the father is demonstrating behaviors away from the child as well as in the presence of the child. And finally, making sure that they do exactly what they say that they want to see versus say something that is the opposite of what they want to see. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Tola.
Thanks so much, Daryl. So Shehan, if you could talk to us now a little bit about the common issues that fathers face in the perinatal period and what kinds of things you see in your practice.
Yes, so I am a clinical psychologist and I focus on obviously fathers' mental health, both moms and dads, but I have a clinic focused on fathers specifically. And you know, one of the things that is kind of already discussed a little bit by Danny and Daryl is that fathers are trying to adjust this new period of life. They don't really have a blueprint on how to do it. And it comes with a lot of stress that they're not always equipped to manage, especially because many people don't even think about perinatal depression in fathers, the fathers, much less society in general. Many times fathers are, you know, really focused on the mother's health, which is obviously understandable and an important part, but they don't always have good insight into their own mental health and their own well-being. They're really trying to focus on making sure the family gets through that initial period. Postpartum depression in moms is a common known idea. So the father is trying to make sure she's doing well. But what we see a lot is that the father's not taking care of themselves, or even, as I said, with their own stress, and that can start to develop into depression for them. What we know is that for fathers during the period, they have depressive symptoms during that time. And we also have concerns that this of men in general not always reporting depression in a more commonly known way, as we see within the DSM, that fathers might be dealing with other symptoms such as, you know, hypersexuality or substance use, or being more aggressive, ways that they're coping with their stress and their depression in masculine ways, but in reality is that they're dealing with a depression that needs to be addressed no different than a traditional major depressive disorder. Around anxiety disorders, we don't have final data on this to be able to report, but we know that it is elevated, and at least clinically we see that as many times what we see more often even than true traditional mood disorder is that there's a heightened level of anxiety. And part of that is due to the stress and the pressure of making sure that they can provide for the family and with trying to figure out how to balance all these different parts of their role. So, you know, for fathers, this is we'll say a newer phase because more recently fathers are more heavily engaged. And even though the fathers being engaged is a positive thing that we advocate for, just like with moms, those fathers who have vulnerability or risk for developing depression the added stress of the postpartum period, along with that vulnerability, can then manifest as depression. So we need men in general to be more in tune with their health and their mental health before even having a child, because just like with moms, having a history of depression can also put the father at risk for depression long term. So there's stress from multiple angles that fathers are coping with, and clinically, my goal is to support that. In addition, I am the chair of the Father Special Interest Group for the Marseille International Society, and we focus a lot on the national side of what fatherhood looks like and how to support fathers through that adjustment, because I think it is, as I think Danny mentioned, like this is not just even a local thing or national thing. This is worldwide. A lot of fathers are adjusting in different cultures and different experiences, complain to how their mental health manifests throughout this perinatal period.
Thank you so much, Shehan. So there's already a lot that we can dig into here with everything that my colleagues have covered. I'm just going to say a few words to kind of frame our conversation a little bit more, and then we're going to dive into some discussion. And what I want to talk about in my opening comments is the implications of fathers' mental health for parenting, for father-child relationships, for relationships between fathers and their partners, and for children's health and well-being. So fathers' mental health, matters inherently. Fathers deserve to feel well and may need at times support if they are struggling. But it's also important to keep in mind that fathers' mental health has implications for their families. So similar to what we may be more familiar with in terms of the implications of maternal mental health issues, we know that paternal mental health issues are associated with emotional and behavioral challenges for children. And research shows that that's not just in the short term, so right in the period when a father is struggling, but that if a father is struggling in the period surrounding the birth of a baby, that's associated even into childhood and adolescence with higher risk of emotional and behavioral problems for their child. So intervening early is really important, not only for men themselves, but for their children, their partners, their families. Some research has looked really specifically at different aspects of parenting and how they are affected by depression or other mental health issues in fathers. Work by Neil Davis and colleagues has showed that by the end of the first year of life, if a father has been struggling with depression, they are more likely to report spanking their child in the first year and less likely to report reading with their child. Some work shows that in the first 5 years after becoming a father, that fathers may experience as much as a 68% increase in depression symptoms. That's work from Craig Garfield and colleagues that is really striking. So across the first 5 years of fatherhood, up to a 68% increase in depression symptoms in new fathers compared to non-fathers. So, taken together, I think what that tells us is that when we try and help fathers and reduce symptoms that they may be experiencing, that is really critical for fathers and for families. It will help to prevent bonding problems and increase fathers' capacity for emotionally sensitive and responsive parenting, and it will strengthen relationships between parents. So another thing that is associated with mental health issues in fathers is increased conflict in the relationship with co-parents. So another thing that I want to talk about briefly before we get started is just the barriers that exist to seeking help. And one big barrier that I want to name is lack of awareness. And this has come up a little bit already in my colleagues' comments, that we're less familiar with the idea of depression or mental health issues as being a challenge for fathers in the period surrounding the birth of a baby than we are with mothers. And it's really important, and I think all of the varied professions that are represented on this call today, all of you who are listening in, all have a role to play in helping to raise recognition of this problem so that fathers and those who care about them are prepared to recognize when they are struggling or when someone they love is struggling, and be able to help them get connected to help. So all kinds of providers, whether it's in early childhood settings, whether it's in healthcare settings, home visiting, have a role to play in helping people know that help is available and to recognize when they're struggling. So one thing that I've experienced and that colleagues who do research on fathers' mental health have experienced is hearing from fathers that, maybe they didn't have a name for it. They didn't think they were depressed or that they were anxious. They just knew they didn't feel right. Something was kind of off, or they were just dealing with a lot of stress surrounding the birth of a baby. And it can be really challenging to distinguish, is this just kind of the normative stress of having a new baby, or is this rising to the level of I really need some, some support and intervention. Knowing that it's possible that problems can be that significant gives people the chance to, consider and get assistance in determining what kind of referrals and resources might benefit them, so that they can get the help they need to be the parent they want to be, to feel well, to show up for their families in the ways that they want to. So with that said, I'm going to invite my colleagues to turn their cameras back on. You're going to be seeing the four of us now as we enter into some discussion that's going to start with some of the questions that you all have put forward when you registered. And the question that I want to use to launch our discussion, it builds on some of what you've heard already. So Shehan, you talked a little bit about how paternal depression can differ than maternal depression. So you talked a little bit about some of the different symptoms that fathers might present with. Related to that, can you talk a little bit about how you would screen a father for depression or other mental health challenges? And do you do it in the same way that you would mothers, or are there different ways that you would approach assessment with a father?
Well, yes, I think especially it's hard because, screening versus the actual assessment if you're actually seeing one in a therapy room. But I think you have to be kind of conscious. I think it's more about have the psychoeducation to know that even if you get a father, let's say a PHQ-9, and the scores might be a little bit lower than you suspected, but you see there's a lot of suffering, to at least ask them more questions about, hey, how have things been going for like your irritability, or how confident are you feeling? Are there other behaviors that the person is manifesting that would be considered externalizing behaviors? The problem is that, externalized behavior is way more socially acceptable for men, that if they punch a wall, that's way more acceptable than them crying in our society. So they may not be coming in with those traditional things you might see with depression in a mom, but manifesting other behaviors that's related to their experience of dealing with emotional distress. If you are able to have time, then adding in a measure of masking depression can go a long way for you and the patient to realize, oh, I haven't been noticing the things on PHQ-9, but I've noticed a slew of symptoms. I've seen that happen with some of my fathers. They're noticing, oh, I've been dealing with a lot of these things that is more common with the masculine depression. So when it comes to clinically, it is useful to have a measure, but if you don't have a chance, at least asking some of those additional questions to see how the father's coping with their stress.
Thank you. Danny, do you want to add anything about how you approach that when you've got a first encounter with a father? How do you go about starting to figure out what might be needed and what the level of distress is?
Well, I ditto to everything that Shehan said. What I would add is, in addition to those externalizing behaviors that, again, unfortunately, we tend to socialize boys and men like that's what strength looks like. You hit things and you act out. Sometimes the father's depressive presentation can also include withdrawal. And that doesn't mean that they're isolated, not being around people. They can be around people at work or at home or in community events, but they're not engaging. And not just assessing like, hey, are you around people, but really sort of, are you connecting? Are you having that experience? Another important part of assessing for that so-called masked male depression is asking questions about somaticizing. Like, I'm not allowed to be depressed. However, I can have migraines, I can have muscle tension, I can have stomach difficulties, these sorts of things. And like Shehan said, given some thought to what are some sort of male specific kinds of screens, like for example, I like the Gottman male depression scale as one example of one that we can use that gets at some of these more sort of traditionally male. It's important to say that women and people of all genders will in fact present with these kinds of depressive presentations, or symptoms. One other point is, you asked about sort of a first meeting with one of these dads. In doing men's work, I find it really important to listen for metaphors, listen for similes, instead of necessarily, some dads will, but instead of a dad showing up saying, I'm really feeling hurt and rejected by my partner, and I don't think that my baby loves me, and maybe thinking these things, but you may hear things like, I feel like I'm like way out on a ledge, or like, I feel like she's taking shots at me. And to be able to hear those sorts of ways of describing feeling upset or distressed without immediately forcing oh, so you feel shame and vulnerability. Like, it's important to try to get there ultimately, but but to meet these fathers and these men where they're at.
Yeah, thank you. Daryl, building on that, what kinds of things do you see in your work with fathers when you're encountering fathers in the context, not of a clinical setting, but of fatherhood programs and, the variety of services that you offer through the Milwaukee Fatherhood Initiative? What kinds of things are kind of flags for you that make you think, oh, I think this father might be struggling or might need some mental health support? What do you see, and kind of what do you do if you see something that raises concern for you?
Well, fortunately, we have a partnership model, so we are putting it as a priority that whenever we find something that might be of concern, we're able to directly contact one of our partners who we have on a first name basis. As a matter of fact, we are now moving our Milwaukee County Child Support Office. We have representatives that are going to be in the same building with us at the Milwaukee Fatherhood Initiative. We're also going to have healthcare providers, and we are going to move in employers who are going to either talk to people about resume building and give some employment consultant for how to attain a job in the type of climate that we're in. So we structured ourselves so that we could engage with the fathers in case they had specific problems that they introduced to us in an assessment. But what we're also looking for are fathers who are going from job to job and are inconsistent with their performance in their employment. We also might have a relationship with a person that, where it comes out in school, they might have been diagnosed with ADHD. So those particular histories are very important also with what they share. There are people who we've encountered where we're giving brief surveys and we discovered that they are probably someone who we need to refer for PTSD also, post-traumatic stress. And this may not just be from an employment situation or being former military. Also, it can come from childhood trauma and any type of relationship abuse that they might have experienced too. We're looking for men who may be engaged in high-risk activity or are making jokes about their use of alcohol and drugs, maybe making jokes about abusing themselves. If they are coming to us, either in their initial calls to us on the phone or in the office, they may be indicating that they're restless, or they might have even lost interest in things that they seem like they should be very excited about. A new child is coming and they seem like they're losing interest in that. Then we know that we're ready to talk to our healthcare professionals or our social work professionals to give a referral for that. Something that I also would encourage the people who are listening to us to at least give a try. Sometimes it's not always appropriate to interview a person in the four walls of an office. You may need to space it out. Maybe if you believe that the person needs more room, and if you're like us, we have a waiting room area that's wider. You might want to give the person more space or more room so that they can relax in that setting. So it depends on the types of open-ended questions that you're asking, as well as the experience that you have on your staff. And I certainly do encourage any type of motivational interviewing training and any type of training that has a focus on men's health or what the concerns of men's are as a specialty area too.
Thank you, Daryl. So I want to expand a little now from, we've been talking about some, individual level kinds of challenges, and I want to bring in some thinking about some of the structural factors that can impact men's mental health. So thinking about racism, thinking about other oppressions that fathers might experience, and how that relates to paternal mental health, and how that relates to the kinds of services we provide, or how we think about engaging with fathers and providing support. So, in the work that you do in providing services to fathers, how do you think about and approach things that are continuing causes of stress that may be out of fathers' individual control? Kind of, how does that fit into the work that you do? And I'll open that up. I'd love to hear, from everyone about that. So, so maybe I'll see who would like to start us off.
Well, I will say, there are a lot of different stigmas that come along with racism and